by stimulating intellectual conversation? Are you turned on by the idea of engaging with thought leaders from across the United States? Do you go gaga over exploring important ideas from influential books, research, and essays? Then welcome to Curiosity Porn, the place you can satisfy all those intellectual urges guilt-free. Your hosts are Dr. Guy Crane, Professor of Philosophy at Rose State College, and Professor James Davenport, Professor of Political Science at Rose State College. However, the views expressed here are solely the views of the hosts and their guests and do not reflect the views of Rose State College, its administration, faculty, or students. And now, here are James and Guy.
James, we have a very interesting episode today. We are just trying all kinds of new formats lately, yes?
I am very excited about this.
We are actually going to do a crossover episode today. We have guests who have their own podcast, an excellent podcast I've been listening to and really enjoying. We are joined today by Kyle and Gary Eastridge. We are thrilled to have you, Kyle and Gary. And since this is a crossover episode, you're having us as well. So instead of doing the rapid fire, get to know you right out of the gate, we thought maybe we should all go around the table, introduce ourselves first. We would love it if you two would start, though.
Gary, why don't you start? My name's Gary Eastridge. I joined the Oklahoma City Police Department in February of 1979. I retired from law enforcement in April of 2017. I actually retired from the police department in 2000. Then I went overseas and worked with the UN International Police Task Force in Kosovo for a year. And then I came back and worked for the postal inspectors, the medical board, doing contract or part-time investigations. Had my own PI agency, similar to Kyle does now. And I say way too much, so I apologize in advance. But when David Prater was elected district attorney in the election cycle of 2006, he offered me the job of chief investigator for the Oklahoma County District Attorney's Office, where I served until the end of April 2017 and took a job in the private sector. I like blues music.
And long walks.
Yeah.
I'm Kyle Eastridge, Gary's younger brother, much younger brother. When I got on the police department in 1985, when Gary retired in 2000, I went and replaced him in homicide. So Gary's spot in homicide, when he retired, I replaced him. And I got to work on one of his old cold cases. So that was kind of fun. But I worked homicide until 2009 at Oklahoma City. I went to OSBI on one of the grants we had briefly solved a couple of cases there, but it was all uphill battle. And then I retired from I left there and started my own PI firm, and we've been doing this ever since.
Kyle, so you said you worked on one of Gary's old cold cases.
Yeah.
Did you solve it?
Yes.
Do you give him a hard time about it?
People ask that stuff, but it's really different when you're an old homicide guy. It's not really that competitive on that topic. It's like everybody is so excited to solve something. And obviously, if he had the information I had, 20 years later, how long was it?
It happened in, I think, 96 or 7. It was about 15 years. But we had thought this main suspect, it's a long, convoluted story, but we had a Polaroid photograph of the guy's arm, and we thought if we could ever identify. Is that a different case?
I forgot I solved 2 of his cases.
Which one?
You're talking Penny, I'm talking about that.
I think I've stirred up a can of worms here.
Ballage. Yeah. Now, on the one, he
solved a lot of his cases.
We're getting way off. So, what was the question again?
I think you answered it just fine.
James is starting stuff right in the middle of introductions. Okay, so for your listeners, my name is Guy Crane. I am a philosophy professor at Rose State College. I've done some work on the Satanic Panic of the 1980s recently. I've got a paper that's forthcoming, and I got one under review. And we have, on our podcast, have already had an episode about this, and very much wanted to have some people on who could talk very specifically about the law enforcement angle of that very period, who had experience in the field at the time. Now, James and I are always just perennially interested in this topic because we lived through it as well, through not law enforcement lenses, but through pop culture and religious sort of fervor in the air experiences. I'll let James take it from there and introduce himself.
Yeah, I'm James Davenport. I am the Associate Dean for Social Sciences at Rose State College. That sounds a lot more impressive than it actually is.
It's impressive.
I have not done research. My research is on Congress and legislatures and such like that. But I absolutely lived through the Satanic Panic of the 80s, came up from a very strong religious background, remember all the stuff flying around and going on. And so this topic absolutely, it brings back some memories. I'm not sure if they're good memories or bad memories, but it definitely brings them back. And I love it. I love exploring it and learning more about it. So we are absolutely excited to be doing this crossover episode with you guys.
Yes, it'll be so great. So this is going to be like a part 2 for us. Our first part, I think I might have talked for 2 minutes on what little sort of sources that I had pulled out about the sort of law enforcement expression, how this like figured into police precincts across the nation. And so it'll be so great to like get a much deeper dive from firsthand accounts. Do you mind if we, for our listeners, we ask you a couple of get to know you questions before? I mean, you've already given us quite a bit. So Kyle, I remember Gary saying, did you say exactly what years you were active in law enforcement?
I believe I did. I may not. I got on in 1985, I think 6 years after you. Mm-hmm. And I retired from Oklahoma City in 2009. I established my PI firm and then put it on hold and worked another 6 months at OSBI on a DOJ, National Institute of Justice grant for cold case DNA homicides and that kind of thing.
Okay. How did you both get into, like, what drew you to law enforcement initially?
He's what drew me to law enforcement.
I've been asked that. I don't know. When I was in kindergarten or somewhere, they had and you may have done it as well, where they set up a projector and then they traced the outline of your profile and you said what you wanted to be when you grow up. I still have that from, I was born in 1957, so it's rather old. And I put policeman in elementary school. We had no other real close family that were in law enforcement. We had a distant uncle who happened to be a gospel singer, or ended up a gospel singer, who was briefly a Tulsa police officer.
Well, that brings up, you mentioned you have some connection to this topic from your religious upbringing. And Gary and I also have that.
We were raised Shiite Pentecostal, and
these are my brethren. These are my brethren right here.
We revolted in different ways. Kyle adopted the Orthodox. Would that be a?
Guy's Orthodox too.
And I just decided that I didn't believe there was any deity, and I'm working on him.
Well, we'll work on him together. We can.
Good luck.
Hey, Kyle, we could even lay hands on him at some point if we need to, right?
Well, I'm sure my mom did in 2 different ways.
She laid hands frequently.
Beating that butt, praying through.
The reason I bring it up is my earliest recollection of this stuff actually predates the satanic baby sacrifice stuff. You remember play Led Zeppelin backwards?
Oh, yeah.
Yes.
Come out and get you.
I tried it. He didn't.
Yeah. Well, you don't know.
Oh my God. Yeah. So this is awesome. Tell us something that you're currently reading, watching, or listening to that stands out to you.
I haven't read much lately. I'm kind of between books, but I'm kind of it's probably too old for you guys. You guys remember the early version, the series of Shogun?
Yes, I think so.
We have a new one out now that's really good. And that's what I've been kind of binging lately.
My wife and I have been watching that as well. So, and we've really enjoyed it also.
I think it's well put together, and it's so far it is.
One of my fascinations, I'm a Smith & Wesson revolver collector. So I'm really fascinated by the gangster era of roughly the 20s through just before World War II. So I'm currently, I've been reading it for a long time because I set it down and get distracted. But I've been reading Year of Fear about the Charles Urschel kidnapping here in Oklahoma City.
Oh, yeah.
From back in 1933 by Machine Gun Kelly.
Is that the house that's in Heritage Hills that has a plaque in front of it explaining? Yes.
15th Street, yes. Because I wrote in that around that district some in my law enforcement career. And but then I'm also reading Newhall Shooting, a tactical analysis. It's a book written by Mike Wood, whose father was a California highway patrolman at the time of the incident, and he does an in-depth tactical analysis of the events. That's only important because it's I was taught about that incident in my police academy in early 1979.
Yeah,
many of the things that we were taught are 100% inaccurate, and this book kind of dispels some of the myths behind it. And then I've been watching Mystery in Between again. That's I like it.
Yeah, that's a good,
because I just finished The Sopranos for about the third time. So
it's weird for old cops to watch all these crime shows and root for the bad guys.
And it's difficult for me to watch anything because I am a firearms enthusiast and I have the background in law enforcement. So as soon as they do something that either operating a firearm that is totally wrong, or they do something in an investigative technique and you go, bullshit, nobody would do that.
Kind of ruins it.
And I got to change it.
So what's one thing about your work that you wish people understood better?
As far as law enforcement goes, I think most cops, if you ask that today, it was the same in our day, but it's far worse now. But the racially, what would you call it? The balance of it's like the harmony, the racial harmony involved in police work is gone, and it's bad. And I wish people understood that there are bad police officers. We've put them in jail or we've resulted in them being fired, but they're not out there trying to kill people because of their skin color or their religious beliefs,
right, or whatever they identify as.
If the everyday person, I think, understood what a cop that shoots somebody goes through, and we've both done it, I think that would be one of my big deals. Is if everybody saw what happens to you when you get in a shooting, even if it turns out to be justified, it's not fun. I wouldn't wish it on anybody.
Yeah, and it's funny because I made some quick notes based on your questions, and my response to that was almost identical in the sense that cops are human, just like doctors, attorneys, professors. there's good ones, there's bad ones. There's the bad ones. There's two different types of bad cops. There's the criminal wearing a uniform, which are really pretty rare in my opinion. And then there is the overall good person that either through a lack of training or a lack of personal skill set, they make a mistake. It may be criminal, but it's not an intentional act to do something where I perceive a threat and I engage that threat, and then that threat was a mistaken perception on my part.
Right.
So I think that most of and I follow police shootings around the country, most of the incidents, regardless of the race of the other person, fall in that category, that it's a bad decision by someone who may or may not be a bad person.
I'll tell you this on that, not to drag this out and waste your whole time, but we are harder on ourselves than anybody else is. If you really think about it, if the police weren't hard on themselves, you wouldn't see any officer charged unless it was something so blatant and obvious. And, we investigate the hell out of our own. It's because real cops want that credibility. They want that relationship with the public. And that's part of my issue with racial disharmony that's going on right now. We've always had racial disharmony in the United States. Gary and I both rode the streets in the predominantly black part of town, and we worked with the community. The people there were victims of crimes. They wanted to work with us. Now, it wasn't always perfect, but you have to understand that honest people are trapped in their homes and that kind of thing. Well, because of the way this has deteriorated over the last few years, I don't see a path back. It scares me, actually, because the animosity there has gotten to a level that it's going to be very challenging to overcome it.
Wow. Well, with that, let's dive into our topic so we can. I was getting a lot of good stuff from you before we started recording. I would love to have some of that. Can you just start us off? So you were both officers during, virtually the entire panic itself. Roughly 79 to roughly 93 is what a lot of the scholars, those are the big brackets they put on it. Can we just start? Do you have any just general memories of the atmosphere, the zeitgeist? Satan was everywhere, kind of. Do you have memories of that sort of thing being
I
in the air?
remember taking calls. Taking calls that, I think animals are being sacrificed here, and you might get out and find a dog that's been hit on the side of the road. When these things pop up like that, the first thing that happens is it enters your calls for the evening because people see it on news, and then you have a certain segment of the population that calls the police a lot anyway. And that's just gives them a topic. And not to say that, people shouldn't take that kind of thing serious and look into it. We're not suggesting that. But we saw this hysteria explode. And for the average cop who had never seen a scene, and you're going to go to that scene if you're a cop, if you're a patrol or whatever. We'd never seen anything like this. So we were already kind of doubtful of it. Yeah, and that's, it's when there becomes, I call it the buzzword of the day, and satanic or occult or ritualistic, the next thing you know is that becomes the topic of the calls. I can say personally, I never took a call that I saw any evidence of anything of the occult or satanic or anything related to that. I saw a lot of dead animals. I saw dead children. I never saw one that appeared to have been sacrificed or
right. I mean, not to say that there hasn't been cases where the people weren't involved in some kind of occult or something like that, but as a principal motive for the crime, I don't remember ever hearing of them. And when I went to cold case homicide in about 2007, I think, and we had 300 cold cases, and that's not all of them. Those are the ones that they identified possible leads on. Going back to 57, my oldest case in homicide was it 57? Reuben Perkins. My memory's getting so bad, I have to ask him about all of his murders I solved. So I felt his eyes on me.
But there none. Did you ever see any that's true? There was any evidence of any satanic involvement?
No, not really. And like you said, the motive is where that's the crux of it. Once you establish a motive, the rest of it goes out. It might have influenced them, but money, sex, and drugs, that's what gets you killed.
Even without this, with the lack of evidence that these killings were related to Satanism, the occult, or whatnot, there were still police officers who were kind of tasked with becoming experts in occult-related or satanic crimes, right?
Right.
Yes, there were.
And you guys, our understanding is you worked with some of those officers. What can you tell us about those officers, what they were expected to do, how they were trained, that kind of thing?
And more so, how did it come about that they existed at all if there were no evidence of needing them?
In about 87, and I'm guessing there, I went to a unit called the FAST unit, which was under special projects. It's like criminal intel and drug narcotics investigations, that kind of thing. The FAST unit was a team of guys that all they did was the surveillance for the narcotics guys. But in that office, when I was up there, they were in the process of establishing this occult unit out of the vice subsection, like criminal intel and that kind of thing. So I think the purpose, I haven't found any of the old guys. I need to try to ask Roger Winborn because he was a captain there. I'll try to find something out from an old captain, but I think their original intention was this hysteria has to be addressed. So how do we address this? Well, they assigned criminal intel investigators, which is the right choice on a bill like that, because we've got all this hysteria with no stats. There's no missing babies that are reported. So they said, you guys start looking into it and see what kind of things you can find. And those guys were going to seminars on, witchcraft and all kinds of crazy shit. But I was going to say, that's how I remember that forming.
I don't know what they did because I never saw any substantial result from any of them.
There wasn't.
However, in my opinion, the buzzword of the day comes along. It gains traction for whatever reason. Then somebody becomes an expert in it. And then you go out and you look at a scene, and all it had to be in a report was possible occult related, possible satanic activity. I mentioned earlier the Jimmy Ray Slaughter case, which was actually in Edmond, but our unit did some work on it. There was a satanic aspect of it. But when you looked at the evidence, you've got a guy that is being hit for paternity, which has financial obligations to it. And if the baby and the mama dies, I don't have to pay my paternal responsibilities. To me, that's clearly the motive of the murder.
And see, that kind of bleeds into a problem for law enforcement out of this. I know to you, it probably sounds like we're griping about all these things. Well, you kind of poison your witness pool. The society has a tendency to do that with these kind of things, because what happens is your average citizen's IQ is usually pretty low that deals with the police a lot. They've seen this on Sally Jossie Raphael, and now everything they call the police fires, they're sacrificing babies.
And then that's how that call goes out. Possible satanic activity.
I'll give you an example. Right after I went back to patrol, I was riding a 2-man unit way up northeast. It's
hotbed for satanic activity.
Oh, yeah. Well, you don't want to do it right in the middle of town.
Yeah.
People stare. But I rode a 2-man car out there. We called it the Green Pastures. It's all around Spencer and everything. And on the overlap days, there was another team of 2 guys that was up there. Well, they sent us up there to find the Purple Church. And this was right after I came out of fast in about 87. So it was right in the hysteria, you know. The neighbors called in, they could hear livestock being sacrificed. And if you've ever been out there, it's like ranches and farmland. So we went out there and stomped around and found the place. It looked like some kids were in this building, you know, burning candles and drinking beer and probably screwing and all kinds of things. I mean, we went out there and looked. There was no evidence of anything that had been burned or killed or anything. But a side story to that is how everything was going on this. That whole call led into a big prank where our patrol command pranked me and my partner and the other guys later. And it was pretty good. They got us pretty good. But basically, a lot of that stuff is like teenagers going out doing what teenagers did. My mom thought everything I was doing was satanic because I listened to Led Zeppelin and, you know, Pink Floyd and Are You on the Peels? You know, that kind of thing. That's how we grew up. So.
And he brings up the Purple Church, and I'd forgot all about it until you sent me your questions. And so I went on and watched a YouTube video of a guy who says he found it. And they said if you go out there, a guy with a shotgun and dogs would run you off. Well, yeah, it's called farmland. That happens all the time in Oklahoma. I own farmland in western Oklahoma. I will likely greet you with my dog and my shotgun if you're on it. And he went and they found it. And as they got close, they heard dogs. So they turned it around. Well, that's evidence of nothing. And that, I think, is you get these what am I trying to say? You see what you want to see
Right.
when you're going out there. To him, that hearing the dog was proof of this satanic activity.
Right.
To me, you know, you're in rural Oklahoma County and people have dogs to protect their livestock.
I wanted to ask you all about that just because I even remember during that period, that was one of the more infamous urban legends of even my childhood, that this was going on. What I was curious about is, like, if you go out there and if that's all at the time, if that's all that you saw was just evidence of teenagers being teenagers, did you still need to write down in the report, like, possible occult related something happened out here?
It would, on our deal, I think it was logged that way. And it went to those investigators. Our call went to those investigators. I know because I talked to them about it.
And just because there's a pentagram marked on the wall doesn't mean that there's satanic activity. You know, you got to separate tagging. You know, I saw CRIP written on more houses and buildings and bridges for 5 years before I ever met a CRIP gang member.
Or knew what it was.
And the people writing that didn't know what a CRIP was, but they had heard about the LA Crips, so they would spray paint that on signs.
Right.
You got to have a little more than that to say there's a satanic link.
A part of me just wonders if their jobs weren't boring in a sense. Do you just show up at a scene and like you see like an Ozzy Osbourne cassette and you're like, look, nothing's really going on here. Your kid just likes heavy metal and like that's the end of it, right?
I don't want to, Gary, you're going to have to help me here. I'm going to go out. My take on it is guys that take those kind of jobs typically want nothing to do and want a PUD assignment so they don't have to do anything. That's my opinion.
And I think there's probably some of that. And I think there's also, you can write a report and be 100% truthful, but sway that perspective.
Sure, to keep your...
There was a period of time when the gang problem became a problem in Oklahoma City. A certain chief who is now deceased sent out a memorandum that you're not to use the term gangs and you're not to use the term drive-by shooting on the radio because you now validate that.
I'm sure that solved the gang problem, right?
Yeah.
Right.
And what did they do after that? About 2 years later, they created a gang unit with a drive-by shooting specialty team.
Right.
Guess what? Gangs and drive-by shooting has money attached to it.
Right. And that's what we were talking about before the show is the cautiousness on a police officer. We're talking about there's different mindsets at a police department. We're old detectives. We never wanted to be bosses. We wanted to investigate murders. That's what we did. Our mindset's different than the command staff. They want to get that money, that federal money. And without a doubt, gangs and drive-by shootings are probably one of the only real problem that popped up in our careers.
Yeah, but then again, when you break down gang and drive-by shootings, are they doing it because I wear blue and I don't like you in red? It's an element of it,
right?
But it's not the primary reason behind it or the primary cause behind it.
And it is also one of those things that turned into millions and millions of dollars.
Is.
Yeah,
and I will say this: I saw evidence of gang activity and drive-by shootings. I've not seen evidence of an occult, satanic homicide.
Well, it's wordsmithing is what it is. Think about this. Right now, the big crime issue with a lot of people is active shooters. Well, what's an active shooter? What we think of as Columbine or one of the many hundreds of others. Now, everything that someone drives and shoots at someone, which we have a ton of, is an active shooter. Just because a guy gets mad in a bar, right? A guy gets mad in a bar because some guy hit on his girlfriend and he shoots and hits three. That's not an active shooter in the definition they're using. It's a shooting or a mass casualty shooting. Well, now there's so much hysteria over active shootings that everything is an active shooting. We just have a lot of shootings.
So with some of these officers that were assigned to these units, were any of them like true believers? They just knew that there was satanic activity and they were going to go root it out? Or on the other hand, did any of them have they figured if they could make this look like it was in the way they investigated it, they would either get more prestige or more financial resources or something like that? Was any of that going on?
I never sat and talked to any, I can only think of a couple of guys that did that. And I've never sat down and said, do you really believe?
I remember because I worked in close proximity at the time. And I remember that they seemed to be somewhat believing but what you have to understand, if the department assigns you a special job, you got to convince them that special job is necessary needed, or they'll get rid of you.
And that goes back to what we were saying earlier. If you interject a buzzword into your report, there was a pentagram, which is a known symbol of satanic worship.
There you go.
Now you've validated the need for your specialty.
And as far as I know, that unit was never responsible for criminal charges or uncovering anything significant. I don't remember them ever filing a charge out of that unit. And I think it was pretty short-lived because this hysteria moved on to something else after that. Can't remember what it was, but it's bombing or something.
It's like everything else. A new buzzword comes along,
right,
takes its place, and then there's a new emphasis based on that. Now, I believe there is Satanism out there. I believe there are people that worship the devil. I've listened to Anton LaVey and some of the others. Most Satanists don't preach human sacrifice and that sort of thing.
Is that what they're saying at your church?
I'm not a Satanist. I don't believe that it is good or bad. I love him.
Satanist, atheist, they're not that far apart, right?
No.
Right.
They're godless.
Godless is accurate, but it's
no. I think the limited. We've run into people from the Church of Satan and all that nonsense before, but I think they're just. Most of the ones we've ever encountered were just people want to counter a culture kind of experience. Is the way I see it.
If you look and you do a deep dive into Richard Ramirez, as far as on a national level, is probably the highest profile satanic occult murderer. If you look at his crimes, that could be an element of it. But he was stealing, he was robbing, he was raping, and he was murdering.
Those things just aren't sexy enough for the news.
Yeah, he wasn't taking people to an altar and sacrificing them and, washed in the blood and all that. He was breaking into a house, and if there was somebody there, he killed them. Right. Now, was he a Satanist? Yeah, he did. Apparently it was. Was that the motive for his crime? Well, that might have made him amoral, which allowed him to do it with his pathological beliefs. But I don't see that Satan was the motive for his crime.
Richard Ramirez is a really interesting example of what happened in a lot of criminal cases across the country at the time. And that is that you might have this one quirky person who is basically just a criminal, but it has the trappings. And if you go, Richard Ramirez in particular, if you actually go look at the sources at the time, there was no evidence that he had any connection whatsoever to any larger body of conspiratorial cabal of Satanists doing anything at all. But the media latched on to the fact that and he actually left a pentagram at the scene. And that sadly fueled a lot of this hysteria that continued sort of looking for the devil in all the wrong places. We had one of those kinds of cases in our own backyard in OKC, right? Can you tell us about the Sean Sellers case?
Yeah, Sean Sellers. Yeah, I had a little bit of a kind of random connection to that case. I was actually dating a woman who was an intern. She was a third-year law student, and she was working at the public defender's office. I was a patrol officer at the time. I had no direct involvement in the case. But she actually, her home backed up to 122nd, and it was just east of Council. Well, the night he shot the convenience store clerk, I believe his name's Robert Bauer.
Mm-hmm.
I can pull out random names every once in a while from 40 years ago, and I can't tell you what I had for lunch yesterday. But when we actually heard the emergency response going to that scene on the night of that murder, then fast forward a while, and she ends up on his defense team. When he calls it in, they stage it to look like a burglary. His mother and stepfather are murdered. Paul Bellafato, and seems like her name was Vonda, but they're shot in their sleep in bed. There's nothing satanic. He was playing Dungeons and Dragons. He didn't even bring that up until around the time of the trial. He had actually murdered Robert Bauer as a test run. He told investigators to see what it felt like to kill someone.
How old was he at the time of all of this?
He was 17. Today, he would not have been eligible for the death penalty, which is a whole nother discussion one can have. But he found, because of the timing, this was about the time of the Satanic Panic, he was able to exploit that into a defense. Well, the jury who heard the evidence saw right through it. And, Dungeons and Dragons, from my understanding, there's a lot of people that play that daily and don't murder anyone.
I was like Gary. I was in patrol, and Bauer was killed in my district. I was off, so it's not my fault. But I rode that district, and everybody knew this kid because everybody go up there and have coffee. And I say everybody, that's other cops. We all knew this kid, and we'd have coffee with him. And I don't know a lot about the scene. I've seen the scenes from schools they put on, and there is no ritualistic element to it at all. It's just trying to get by with things. It's like killed the guy, get out of there. There's no staging or now.
Well, even on the murder of his mother and stepfather, they're shot. They're just shot to death in their bed. There's some evidence that she probably woke up but there's nothing about the scene that would indicate ritualistic behavior.
It's interesting you say that. So does it sound like, it sounds like what you're suggesting is like this was a very strategic move on his part to sort of like hop on the train that was kind of already in motion culturally at the time, right? I remember, I think I found one source where he did appear from prison on one of the talk show specials that was drumming up the lore. I wondered then if this wasn't his attempt to keep going on.
I don't know. Who else did that? Ted Bundy. Ted Bundy, when it got close to getting a needle stuck in his arm, all of a sudden he has this big religious conversion, and he starts talking about the evils of pornography. I've known a few people that enjoyed pornography and haven't murdered anyone, but it was convenient, and it actually, he tried to parlay that into stays of execution. You look at Sean Sellers, that all came, I believe that, what was the talk show host he was on? What talk show was Sellers on?
I want to say it was the Geraldo Rivera special, but
Geraldo's sounds right.
If I'm not mistaken, wasn't that post-conviction?
Yeah, I think so. Mm-hmm.
Yeah, and it's an effort. You try things. Every homicide case, Kyle can tell you, I can tell you that when they're caught, they start trying to mitigate what they've done. And there's a thing called self-serving statements. And you try to put yourself in the best light. Well, at a certain point, when the evidence is overwhelming, you're a bad person, you believe on the supernatural. You know, the devil made me do it.
The question for me, though, is did Sean come up with this idea, or did his defense team later? Because that's the first job of a defense attorney, especially when they know they're guilty, is what are we going to throw at this, you know? So I'd be curious.
I'd love a chance for James and I to share something with you, because we have both now, as of today, for me, subjected ourselves to some of those old videos. One that I did not subject myself to, I want James to tell you about, is a movie called Mazes and Monsters. James, what is Mazes and Monsters?
I've heard of that.
You know, it's unfortunate that one of the greatest actors of our time was associated with that movie, Tom Hanks.
Oh, you're talking about Pardue the Holy Man. That's his name in the movie you're talking about.
You might be right, but you just remember this was basically Dungeons and Dragons is going to make you kill people. That's basically the theme of the movie, right? It was a really bad movie.
Yeah, I remember it.
I tried to get my kids to watch. I've got several. Well, at this point, almost all of my kids love playing D&D, and I tried to get them to sit down and watch it with me, and the version I had was so bad they were like, "No, we can't do that." But yeah, just the idea, and it comes along, and it just perpetuates already accepted notion that all of these different strange things that are popping up, they're all connected, and Satan is behind them all, and he's trying to, again, grab our children and make them do evil things. And they're handing their mind, these role-playing games, they're handing their minds over to Satan, type of thing. And so it just kind of perpetuated the zeitgeist this guy mentioned earlier that was going on at the time, right? And fed into that.
Well, and I subjected, I don't know if you all knew this at the time, because it sounds like you didn't have as close a connection to the folks who were supposed to be the occult expert cops, but I managed to find there were two major produced films that were supposed to be geared toward training these sort of occult cops at the time. One of them was produced by the state of Louisiana, and it was called something like Satanic Crimes and Cults. And it's only about like 13 minutes.
Law enforcement techniques come out of Louisiana. I'm going to get some hate mail over that. But
to our podcast listeners, you heard it here, folks, not out of our mouths. Okay.
And that's our Gary opinion.
And we have family from Louisiana.
Well, and it's every sort of like superstitious thing that you're bringing up, Gary. I mean, it was just like if there's a pentagram on a tree, and then what was really funny is like, oh, you need to memorize these dates that are very important to a Satanist calendar. Well, by the time you get to like the 25th holiday, it's hard to like find a date on the calendar when something won't seem kind of significant as a satanic.
Bad things happen.
And of course, like it was funny to me, the one I watched, because anything remotely heavy metal, and I was telling James this earlier, they even said Def Leppard, and I was like, talk about the most like poppy sounding rock band at the time that was not even remotely themes of Satan or evil or anything in the music. And there was that one came out in 1990, which is kind of late in the stage. But the second one I found was like an hour and 13 minutes, produced by a former cop turned pastor in 1994. And his was far more intricate. And he had this allegedly former Satanist turned Christian walk through this park in San Francisco and just randomly find all of these various elements of, see, Satanists have been here and they've been doing stuff. And I found an article where they had interviewed the producer at the time who agreed to do this project. And the guy said basically like, listen, we found this guy, Eric Pryor, and he was willing to do this. Well, I swear we showed up and it looked like he'd already been in the park for a while. I'm almost positive he went up there and spray painted those damn pentagrams on the tree and then ran into the park and said, like, let's just randomly walk through the park and see if we find stuff.
Self-preservation.
Yeah. Well, it's similar to that. Who was the female canine handler that they would bring in to find bone fragments?
I think she was out of Ohio.
And then they find out how she's planting them. They catch her actually planting the bone samples. Well,
and here's the thing, and I apologize, I don't know what your graphic level is on this. We talk homicide. So an infant, the way it was understood at the time is these women would have an infant specifically for a sacrifice. Is that how you remember it, Guy?
That is what the sources claimed when the people would claim, but I mean, there was no evidence of, yeah.
Right. The body of a newborn is going to disappear real fast. They decompose real quick because their bones are real soft and they haven't really established, and there's not much of them. So it's real hard. What is it they'll saying? You can't prove a negative. You can't prove these babies aren't dead out here because they'd be gone pretty quick anyway. The frustrating part of it later, not at the time, Gary and I have worked plenty of dead children, and it's kind of an insult for all these people to be out there using up resources when we know children get murdered terribly on a pretty routine basis. And those murders are usually by people that they put they have their welfare in mind, like their parents or guardians and things like that.
Parents or relatives, yeah.
Yeah, and you distract from the facts, the ugly realities of life when you make up fictitious realities.
Yeah, if you had a woman who was having a child every 9 months,
right,
just for the purpose of sacrifice, at some point, somebody's going to notice, hey, Jane is pregnant every 10 months or so,
but
and then she doesn't have no children. In today's society, the communication level, something happens anywhere in the world, and in 5 minutes, I know it right here. If people, I spent a year working in Serbia, I still stay in touch with those people, with a lot of those friends and family. If this was happening, someone would have noted and shared it. Hey, I'm worried about so-and-so. Yeah, maybe one person gets away with it. Maybe there is that anomaly that's doing something along that line, but it's not widespread because you couldn't hide that fact. If there was a whole herd of, for lack of a better term, and this is going to sound misogynistic,
I'm just warning
but I don't
you.
mean it to be. If there's a whole herd of broodmares for sacrifices, well, somebody's going to notice that.
That's kind of the premise they were operating on, is they had these breeding women that were just for providing human sacrifices. And on a very small scale, like some kind of, like the crazy cult in West Texas, you could probably hide some of that on a small scale.
Mm-hmm.
The scale they were talking about, you couldn't hide that.
Of course not. Of course not. Listen, we are right up against our time in the studio. We have one question we always ask everybody at the end. I want James to take the honors this time. And it's a question we just like to ask all our guests, but it will lighten. We will end up on a light note because of this question. James, what do we ask our guests?
Yes, but I am going to warn you, your answer could make one of us less enthralled with you, depending on the answer you give. All right. But this is the most important question we ever ask a guest, all right? If you had the choice, after leaving here, you had two options for entertainment, all right? And here are your options. Which of these two would you choose? Would you be more likely to go watch an episode of Seinfeld or an episode of 30 Rock?
Seinfeld.
That's a tough one for me.
Seinfeld.
I don't
do science fiction.
No,
kind of fine.
30 Rock is the one with Baldwin. It's hilarious.
Yes, that's right.
It's
yeah,
funny, but it's sci-fi. It's the guy
it's the one where he's like the executive of NBC or whatever.
Gary, you might be thinking of Third Rock from the Sun.
Third Rock.
Yeah.
30 Rock.
That's
is
all
Tina
right.
Fey
That's all right.
No clue
Gary,
what the other one is.
still said Seinfeld.
I got Kyle though.
So we're still at a draw, right?
James and I are at a tie. This is our deep debate between us, which is the better comedy. Yep.
All right.
Well, listen, it has been a pleasure having you both on. We might have to do this again sometime. Really enjoyed the conversation. I learned so much when I have these conversations, even about things that I lived through, because you only pick up one or two pieces here or there. So thank you for being with us today.
You bet. And thank you guys for being on ours.
Happy to.
Anytime, guys.
We will see everybody next time.
Thanks for listening to Curiosity Porn with the two best intellectual pole dancers in the United States, Dr. Guy Crane and Professor James Davenport. If you'd like to share a comment about today's episode, suggest a guest or topic, or just leave a compliment or complaint, you can reach us at curprn@gmail.com. We hope to hear from you.